Alright, good morning, everyone. It's still morning. My name is Benjamin, and welcome back to Midterms Update. I'm kind of sorry, like I said, life's been kind of hectic for me right now, so I'm going to try to get onto it. I've got I've got Wednesdays and Thursdays off, so I should be able to get a video up every week on one of those 2 days. But we'll see. I'm going to really try to do that. But yeah, so I'm kind of doing a little bit of an update and house cleaning on the midterms. Obviously, likes, comments, subscriptions, they always help, and I greatly appreciate them. Likes and comments help the algorithm not hate me. And comment and subscriptions. Hey, I want to reach 1,000 subscribers. That'd be really cool. Then I get to have at least I talked to the owner of the website. If I reach 1,000 subscribers, he'll put my logo somewhere so I can actually add it to the screen. All right. So yeah, if we go to, we'll look at the Senate first, and I did a little bit of house cleaning. I checked all the polls, all that stuff, and I'm downgrading Washington for the Democrats for one reason. Notice something weird when I looked at all the polling. Number one, there was only one nonpartisan poll of the race, which is going to be current incumbent Senator Patty Murray versus Tiffany Smiley. And Smiley's been gaining traction, but is still, in terms of the average, sitting around 40%. Now, there's only one nonpartisan poll of this race so far, at least that 538 has, and that was done by King, a local news outlet in Seattle. And the other is from a partisan pollster. In none of the polls, none of them showed Murray with more than 50% of the vote. Well, one of them did, but it's all hovering around that 50% mark, and it's gone, and it's just stayed steady, whereas Smiley's gained ground. So this is potentially going to be a competitive election, but I don't believe it enough because there's not enough nonpartisan polls, there's not enough data on the race recently for me to say definitively whether or not it's getting competitive. And for all we know, it's just statistical noise, especially because the only pollster is a very partisan pollster. At least only pollster that's consistently polling the race. And it's done by a pollster that, in my opinion, tends to favor the Democrats a bit too much, even when they're doing stuff that isn't sponsored by a partisan pollster or partisan organization. And of course, a partisan organization sponsored this poll. In going to this, we're still very early in the cycle, but we're not as early as I think some people expect. We've got just over half a year till the elections. We should be having polls coming out left, right, and center, but they're not. And that's a bit of a concern for me, because we're not getting an accurate picture of the race. Plenty of generic ballot polls are coming out, but we're not getting Senate election polls, which is really weird to me, because Senate elections, they don't change every 10 years. Their boundaries are set in stone, quite literally. Their courses are carved, their boundaries are carved by rivers, lifted by mountains, all that sort of thing. So we get weird situations like in Pennsylvania, for example. One of the most important, most competitive seats this cycle, and the only two people who have been polling this race, or at least releasing polls of this race, are the Fetterman campaign, and he, in his own polls from a partisan pollster, I think it's Data for Progress. Yeah, when you call yourself that, you're not entirely scientific in what you're trying to get. Do they have a decent methodology? Yeah, but they skew their numbers a little bit because they have an agenda they want to push with their polls. They're basically doing the old Karl Rove push-pull tactic. And in his own polls, he's only just barely beating any Republican. And then the only other group that's polled it is a Democratic Political Action Committee. And they released it, and it shows them, again, only just beating the Republicans. So, I'm skeptical. I am skeptical that the Democrats are actually in control of that race. Now, Wisconsin's a little bit different, but again, there's just no real polling. So, the truth is, I'm going to have to leave a lot of these Senate seats, pretty vague, and I can't really touch them until we start getting polls on them. New Hampshire is one we have been getting polls on, and they're pretty consistently, now that Sununu has said, no, I'm going to run for re-election as governor, they're pretty much clearly showing Hassan having a comfortable but not uncompetitive lead over whoever the Republicans nominate. So basically, Hassan got saved. Because every poll that had Sununu in it, she was losing. And then we go to North Carolina, where pretty much every nonpartisan poll shows whoever the Republicans nominate, except for, I think, McCrory. I think every Republican but McCrory would beat whoever the Democrats put up. So, yeah, I'm confident enough to put that as a lean. In Ohio, I re-looked at it, and I'm dropping it down from likely Republican because Tim Ryan is actually looking competitive. It's another case where we've actually got enough polls for me to start actually truly evaluating the race. And, well, Tim Ryan is a lot more competitive than I thought he was going to be. Then we go to Florida, where Marco Rubio is actually doing better than I expected him to be. And I'm seriously considering moving that into the safe category. Rubio kind of dominates. Rubio is a force in Florida. We go to Georgia, and I'm moving it from tilt Herschel Walker to lean Herschel Walker. Because every poll is showing Walker beating Warnock by about 4 to 5 points. And that's every nonpartisan poll. And most of it is 4 to 5 points. A few are closer. But Walker is doing what he needs to do. And I told y'all, and I keep telling y'all, don't underestimate the college football vote in the South. I heard people in 2020 saying that, Doug Jones will compete against, was it Tuberville? Yeah. Tuberville in Alabama. Because, Tuberville's going to win because it's Alabama and he's a Republican. You could put anybody as a Republican. But Doug Jones will compete because Tuberville's a college football coach who I'm not sure he actually understands how our government works. Because there were a string of gaffes with Tuberville. I said, that's not going to happen. As a matter of fact, he's probably going to beat his own polls by a good enough margin. because of the college football vote. Well, guess what? I was right. Then that's not to toot my own horn. It's, listen, I'm serious about, this exact phenomenon. Then we go to Arizona, where actually it hasn't been polled in a while, but Mark Kelly is doing pretty well in those polls. So I decided to put it as a tilt to him. Again, it hasn't been polled in a little bit, and the national environment has only gotten worse for the Democrats, especially with inflation being at 8.5%, which is a tenth of a percent more than economists expected it to be. Now, that's a tenth of a percent. That is just... But inflation should not be really above 2.5%. We're at 8.5%. And most economists right now don't think that inflation is going to slow down until next year. And the Federal Reserve is being naive or stupid or dangerous right now, because the chairman of the Federal Reserve basically said, I'm confident that we can get inflation under control without causing a recession. Every single time the Federal Reserve has tried, they failed. And guess what they're going to do to try to increase, or to try to stop inflation? The same thing they tried the other times they tried to control inflation. Hike interest rates, and I think they also want to require banks to keep more cash on hand as well. I think that's one of the other ideas being floated. But that's a problem, because they're going to kill the consumer part of the economy. They're going to just destroy the consumer part of GDP by doing that. They're going to kill the investment part of that as well. Basically, I legitimately believe we're headed into a recession, which, again, that's bad news for the Democrats, because they're going to be the ones at the top, and the ones in the White House. They're going to get the blame, whether or not it's entirely deserved. And I'm not sure it is entirely deserved. It's partially deserved. And again, the Republicans are going to have some share of the blame, but the Federal Reserve is going to have the most blame. Anyway, then I looked at Nevada. And in Nevada, Cortez Masto, she is being... there was only one nonpartisan poll that showed her up, and that's looking more and more like an outlier. Now, again, it hasn't been polled in a little bit, but pretty much every Republican in that race is outpolling her by a few percent. So, and Alaska, it's more than likely going to wind up being a Republican. It's just a question of who. Their jungle primary makes it a gigantic mess, and no one really knows what's going on. And actually, I should specifically switch to Alaska here, and I'm going to drop this down. So one thing that happened while I was getting a promotion, among other things, was that Alaska's very long-time representative, he passed away, and there's a special election for that seat that's going to coincide with the general election. The special election has a lot of the people who were running for the Senate seat uh, jumping into the House seat because they don't want to face off against Murkowski. And most of them are running in the general. Now, this is one where craziness could happen because Alaska is not a very partisan state. And the Libertarian Party does traditionally quite well there. So Libertarians could legitimately pull off a House seat just because of the weirdness of it all. Because it doesn't take long for, say, I don't know, let's say the top four winds up being Al Gross, a Libertarian, Sarah Palin, and a generic Republican. So, sorry, I was just looking at the ad. I'm sorry, a gas tax freeze isn't a good idea. I'd love to get rid of it entirely. But anyway. Um, Gross would probably be last with a decent libertarian campaign. Most of his voters aren't going to vote, especially considering he was a Democrat for a long time. Most of his voters are not going to vote for Palin. They might vote for a generic Republican, but more than likely their second choice would be the Libertarian. If they marked off the Libertarian as their second choice, might put him ahead, a generic Libertarian ahead of a generic Republican. Generic Republican, 50-50 whether or not they want Palin. Their votes would be split, and who knows, a Libertarian might pull that off. But more than likely, a Republican is going to win that seat in Alaska. It's just, there's a lot of moving parts in the jungle primary and then top four general election. So, yeah, it's a mess. Now, I also took some time, did some house cleaning of my map, because that was a good idea. States that are actually notable. Arizona, I think I'm pretty much spot on right now, based off of just the pure partisanship and the generic ballot, which right now is favoring the Republican Party. I think this is pretty much where it is likely going to be. Obviously, the fourth could be won by a Democrat, by the way. Connecticut, again, very swingy. Connecticut has a lot of swing voters. Basically, voters who are not with one party or the other. It just has that many more Democrats and Republicans among the partisan population. But it's enough that the Republicans could reasonably win 2 of the 5 seats that Connecticut gets in the House of Representatives. And I suppose putting the third is... I'm reasonably confident about that. That's not too crazy to say. But the Republicans could absolutely win 1 or both of those seats. They could also win none. That's absolutely true. Florida hasn't released a map yet. Georgia. Bishop will very likely win another term, but the Republicans are putting up a strong challenger who, with the way the national environment is going, could potentially win in the 2nd District, but the 2nd District is very polarized partisanly, and partially because this is a plurality black district, so yeah. Illinois, I did some housekeeping in the Chicago area, fixed a few things. I'm reasonably confident down ballot, or downstate, that the Republicans could have a very good time. But the 13th, obviously, Democrats could absolutely win that. Another, let's look. Louisiana finally got theirs, and well, okay, this shouldn't surprise anyone. So I'm gonna kind of fast forward through that. Maryland had to redo their maps, and the state legislature drew a map that Larry Hogan said, "Okay, I will. I'll sign it if you drop your lawsuit against or your appeal against the old map, and we'll have this map." And they did. They compromised. They said, "You know what? We wanted to draw all the Republicans out, but the Supreme Court probably was going to agree with the lower court. So you know what? Let's not waste any time. Let's get this done." And so we got a reasonably fair map. It's not the most fair map you could draw. A 5-3 map probably would, or 5-2 with a competitive seat map would be probably the most fair you could do. But it's better than the old map. It's also more compact than the old map, and it's a lot more balanced than the old map. The Republicans realistically have a shot at 3 seats, but in terms of a practical sense, it's really going to be 2. But I think the Republicans will take that in Maryland. And I genuinely think that the 6 is going to be a flip, just because of the way the national environment is. Anything else that's interesting? Michigan, yeah, I'm pretty much sticking with that. Except I did change that to a safe seat. It really shouldn't change anything. Minnesota, I did some house cleaning, looked at partisanships, all that stuff. Even though the Republicans absolutely can win the 2nd district, I'm going to err on the side of the incumbent here. So, yeah. Missouri hasn't released theirs. Nevada, I did a little bit of house cleaning. Looked at it and I thought, okay, you're going to have some incumbency as well. But the Democrats really kind of hurt themselves with this map, so I'm not sure why the Republicans are suing, really. Because they're probably not going to lose the 2nd district in the entire decade. And the rest of the districts, they could absolutely they could sweep in a decent year. Like, not even a good year. They could sweep all of them in a decent year. New Hampshire hasn't released theirs. New Jersey, I kind of looked at it. I fixed a few things. But New Jersey has a terrible map. And unfortunately, their state Supreme Court threw out the lawsuit that alleges that the map is a partisan gerrymander and violates the Constitution of New Jersey. Which is correct. It's just the state Supreme Court I don't think wanted to rule against a former justice who basically awarded control of redistricting to the Democratic plan because the Republicans controlled it in 2010. That's not fair, especially with this map. I don't know how anybody could think that's fair, but okay. New Mexico, I kind of reevaluated it. New Mexico is probably going to have the most competitive House seats because the first is only just barely over D+10. And both of these are under D+5, and in a good year for Republicans, especially if the Republicans do well with Latino outreach, those could... Democrats may have just accidentally, again, screwed themselves over in the House in New Jersey, or New Mexico at least. New York, again, I did a little bit of house cleaning, but mostly here and probably actually change the Staten Island district to a lean for the Democrats. But this map is under litigation, and a lower court judge actually threw it out. So we may actually see a redo of this map, a redo of the New York map. But then again, all of the state Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York, they're all Democratic appointees, and they may basically say that's not a partisan gerrymander, even though, which it would go against New York's Constitution, but they may not throw it out because reasons. I hope they would, because this is a pretty blatant partisan gerrymander, but I'm skeptical they will. It's not compact in any reasonable definition. It's just not a good map. Where's the next one? North Carolina. I fixed a few things. I thought this district had less of Raleigh, Wake Forest, the metro area than it did. So I fixed it accordingly. The 6th, I also fixed accordingly. 1st, and yeah. So I pretty much fixed it. So I think we're okay there. In Ohio, I kind of looked at it and I said, well, these actually have Republican advantages in partisanship, the 9th and the 13th, with the national environment the way it is. I'll throw in the Cincinnati district. And the Republicans really could. But again, this map is in litigation and it'll probably get thrown out. Because they have a standard to measure whether it's a partisan gerrymander. And basically, their standard is the most you've gotten in an election the past decade was 55%. So you really should only draw 55% of the districts to yourself. Whether it's, in terms of, safe and competitive. If a few wind up being more competitive, well, okay. Now, that said, the Democrats really have terrible geography in Ohio. To the point where it may actually be difficult to uphold the Ohio State Constitution without extreme partisan gerrymandering the other direction, which would be direct violation of it, because it would be a deliberate gerrymander. So, if you're keeping it geographically compact and not deliberately doing a partisan gerrymander, it's really difficult. It is really, truly difficult. Because you've got Toledo, which is not big enough to be its own district. Columbus, which you have to deal with VRA. Same thing with Cleveland. And Cincinnati, which, no matter how you cut it, you can really only truly... Yeah, it's a mess. But you might be able to do it. Going to Oregon, like I said, I did a little bit of house cleaning. This district has Salem in it, so I put it the other way, even though it's a very competitive district. Same thing with the 4th. I do think the Democrats kind of hurt themselves, because in Republican wave years, this map could absolutely produce a Republican majority in the congressional delegation. We go to Pennsylvania, where I fixed this by looking at partisanship in the national environment. For those of you saying that the 17th was going to stay blue, its partisanship is basically even. It's like D+1. That's not really an advantage. and it's certainly not enough to cancel out the national environment, which is going to favor the Republican Party. And I also kind of fixed some of these, and it's the same story here, that both of these actually are Republican leaning. Normally I would favor the incumbent in this one, but I think it's just too Republican leaning. So yeah, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And here's the thing. The 12th, which has only parts of Allegheny County, aka right here, 12th probably, 12th could get competitive. So this isn't as sure a thing as you would think. I'd keep eyes on that. To South Carolina, no, that one's not interesting. But it is in litigation because you could draw a second majority black district in South Carolina. Texas, I did a little bit of housekeeping. I'm keeping the 28th in favor of Cuellar because incumbency. But if the Republicans really campaign down along the Rio Grande Valley, they could easily flip that seat. That's not a question. Now, this map is, of course, in litigation right now, but we'll see whether or not the Supreme Court overthrows it, because it's the federal government suing a state. That goes direct to the Supreme Court. Utah is in litigation. Virginia, this one really I haven't changed all that much. I know there's probably on my channel a few fans of Spanberger, but I think she's in legitimate danger. And with the way last year's gubernatorial election went, legitimately it is going to be she's going to be in trouble potentially. The next truly interesting one is Washington. If the polls are to be believed, that that the Republicans are doing well at the statewide level, aka for the Senate, the Republicans actually do stand a much better chance of flipping some more congressional districts in Washington. The 8th, 10th, and 6th could all... The 8th could flip, the 10th and 6th could become competitive and even potentially flip if that were the case. But yeah, other than that, nothing too crazy. And until we get the final 3 states, Florida, Missouri, and New Hampshire, it's pretty... And unless we get some developments in the House, California is a gigantic mess, and I would love to see polling, but, you know, and you can make the argument that this seat is not all that competitive, but I'm kind of banking on the Republicans actually continuing Latino outreach, because that's a more rural district with a more rural Latino population, which was trending towards the Republican Party. And if we remember from the California recall election last year, Republicans did actually do well in Latino areas in California, or at least the anti-Newsom part of it. So yeah, anyway, that's going to be it for today. I want to thank everybody for watching. See y'all next time. Bye bye.